Hi everyone, this is Amanda from the Quilting Bee in Massillon, Ohio. And this morning I wanted to walk you through a tutorial on how to make what we call a cell phone sofa. It's just a nice guy that props your phone up really nicely, holds it up. I make mine a little bit bigger than some of the patterns you might find online. A lot of the patterns out there use a piece of fabric that is 5 inches by 16 inches. I like to go a little bit bigger because our phones are getting larger, so I cut mine just a little bit bigger at 5.5 by 16.5. So the things you need are going to be that scrap fabric that's at least 5.5 by 16.5 inches long, a scrap piece of fabric that you're just going to use to make a beanbag out of. You just want to make sure if you're using a light fabric for your exterior that you use a light bag, otherwise you'll see your beanbag coming through, and we don't want to see that. So my beanbag material, as I like to call it, is 4.5 by 6 inches. You're also going to need a funnel because we're going to be putting some weight into the cell phone sofas in the beanbag. You need some polyfill, so as if you're making a pillow. You don't need a lot, we just need a little bit to give the back some structure, makes it a little chubby. And then you need something to weight it down with. So you have a few options. You can use what are called poly pellets. These are a weighted stuffing bead. So those alternatives would be either rice, just a dry rice. You can also use crushed walnuts. Now these are things I think you can find maybe in a craft store. I have found that the cheapest place is actually Pet Supplies Plus, because this is actually something they use in reptile cages. So you could also use crushed walnuts. Now some people will say, oh, but that could attract rodents. I've yet to have an animal try to eat a cell phone sofa, but you do you. There's also going to be a little bit of hand stitching. This is a combination of sewing on your machine and hand stitching. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we've got our pieces cut. Again, this is 5.5 inches by 16.5 inches. And we're actually going to fold this in half, right sides together. And from one edge of the fold, just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to stitch all the way to the end, making sure to back tack at our beginning and ending. On the other side, and notice I'm lining this up, we want to start 2 inches up from that folded edge. So we're going to leave an opening. So you can mark it, you can eyeball it. The more you do, the more you can just sort of gauge where it is. But I'm going to go ahead and mark this to be precise. So that's my 2-inch mark. So I'm going to start my seam on this side here at the needle, going to the edge. Again, 1/4 inch seam, back tacking at my beginning and ending. So here you can see we've got a little hole there, and then we've seamed right to the edge, and the other side is completely seamed. So at this point, we can turn this out. You actually want to tuck it in to create your seam allowance, because then we're going to give it a nice press. So I like to tuck it in and edge and gave this a nice press, so I have a nice even seam, so that seam allowance is just tucked in there. We're actually going to fill that hole. Then draw a line 2 inches up from that fold line is where you want to draw your first line using chalk or a heat erasable pencil, and then 2.5 inches up from the fold line, or a 1/2 inch space. This is where your phone is going to get cradled in the cell phone sofa. So I've drawn 2 lines there and there, and we're going to go stitch, back tacking at the starting and ending. You also want to make sure whatever thread you're using is something that blends well or works well with your fabric, because this is going to be stitched and shown on the outside. So I'm going to go stitch on my 2 lines. Okay, so there we have 2 stitch lines. And right now, we have a little hole to fill. So what we're going to do is use our funnel. And again, you can use whatever filler you would like to use. We're going to see how well I can do this on camera. And we're going to fill this compartment that we've created till about an inch from that line so that we can seam this easily by hand, 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And I find I have to sometimes pat it down. And if you find you've got enough, you just put those back in. That feels about good. Standing on its own, so I know it's got some sturdiness to it. So like I said, we've already folded in our seam allowance. So now what I'm going to do is just whip stitch this by hand. I also find, just to keep those pellets from getting in my way, that pinning this closure makes the job go a lot faster. Now, nothing's coming out. Okay, so the weighted end is ready. I'm gonna rub off my chalk marks a bit. So now we can put this guy aside. We're gonna make our bean bag real quick. First thing you're going to do, doesn't even have to be pressed, don't have to worry about turning it out, because this is going inside our bag. So we've folded it in half, and I'm going to stitch this short end and then the long end, leaving just one end open. So now what we want to do is fill our bean bag. This we're going to fill to about 1 inch from the top. So I'm about 1 inch from the top. And again, we're not worrying about seam allowance here. I am going to pin this because it's going to go under my machine, but we're not going to close this as it naturally wants to. We need this to help give us some structure. So we're actually going to turn it and pinch these two edges together like so. So we end up with a bit of a 3D triangle. So push your seam in to create that triangle shape. Again, leaving about 1 inch there. Go ahead and pin there at the top of your beads, just so nothing comes flying out as you're stitching. And then you're going to take this to your machine and just stitch this bean bag closed. So now what we're going to do is take the cell phone sofa, and again, we're going to let this guy help keep, this is going to help shape the cell phone sofa. So notice I'm laying it with that seam standing up on end, so I have a nice flat bottom. The pointed end is going to be on this outside edge of the cell phone sofa. And we're just going to slide this guy in, just like so, and take him to about the edge of where we've sewn that second seam. So this is where your polyfill comes in. We're going to stuff this. So I like to take just a few pieces and just start to stuff, keeping that bean bag in the center. We're going to fold this back end of the cell phone sofa the same way we did the bean bag. So you don't need to stuff it too much, because we want to be able to sort of prop it up, and we'll end up folding in the seam allowances and stitching that closed. So what you're going to do then, after you've stuffed it, is just like we did with the bean bag, fold it down about 1/4 inch. And again, we're matching seam to seam. We want to make it a triangle, because then it's going to sit nicely. You can pin here to keep your sides together and stitch about 1/8 inch from that side. And once you're done, back tacking, of course, at the beginning and end, you have yourself a cell phone sofa.